Well, welcome back. In my last video, a week or so ago, I covered a couple of very small tips on split toning images, and I thought it'd be a good idea to come back and do a slightly longer video and give you some more tips on how we can apply these various effects to our shots. So that's what this video is going to be about today. We're going to be using Lightroom and Photoshop, and I'm going to give you a few examples of how we can apply some various toning techniques to the images. Now my first tip is one from within Lightroom. I'm using Lightroom 3, but it has got a split toning dialog box under the develop module. You'll see the split toning dialog box here, and it's very simple to use, a little bit restrictive, but fairly simple to use. We're going to cover this one first. So in the box here, you'll have a little color icon box. If you click on there, you'll come and you'll find this color chart, and you can go through this color range here and just pick out various colors with the eyedropper tool. The other way you could use it is you could hold down the shift key, and if you drag the icon out, it will actually come out into your image, and you can actually use the color picker to maybe pick a color that's already exists within the image, like so. So I can highlight this tail of this plane, and you can see it's picked out a nice blue, and then from there we can move this around, maybe desaturate it a little bit, or we can use this saturation tool here, and you can see as I slide that up and down, the color in this icon changes. And what we can do here is apply that. We can change the hue on the fly using this slider and the saturation here, like so. I'm going to leave that about halfway for now. Underneath that, you'll find there's a balance slider, which I'll come back to in a minute, and also underneath that you'll find another similar dialog, and this is for the shadows. This one's for the highlights, to pick out a colour for the highlight of the image, and this one's for the shadows. So if I click on the shadows, I can do the same again. I can pick out a colour for the image, or shift and drag the eyedropper across. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to the highlights. I'm going to pick out a warm colour for the highlights, like so. Nothing too strong in colour. Very subtle. And then I'm going to come to the shadows, and I'm going to pick out that blue that we picked out earlier on. With the balance slider, this will shift the balance between the highlights at this end, so you're going to pick out more of the highlights colours, or down towards the shadows. So you see now the image has changed, and we're getting more of the shadow colour coming through. So this is a good little way of kind of balancing the image. Now with this image, I think this one suits kind of a high-techy and slightly cool look to it, in my opinion. So I'm going to keep the balance around there. We can also bring up the saturation. We think we want a bit more colour coming through for the highlights, and warm those clouds up. We can slide that across, and the same with the bottom one. We can change the hue and the saturation. I'm going to drop down the saturation a little bit, like so. So very easy to use, but again, it's a little bit restrictive. But with some images like this one, that's probably fine for what you want to get out of the image. Okay, so for the rest of this video, we've come out of Lightroom and we're going to be using Photoshop. I'm using CS3, but a lot of these techniques can be used in other versions of Photoshop. So I'm going to start off with something fairly simple. I've got a black and white image in front of me. I'm going to come down here to Adjustments Layers, and I'm going to just pick out Hue Saturation. Now, this is fairly straightforward, but I've got a little bit of a twist with it, which will help the effect look a little bit more polished. So we're going to tick the box here which says colorize, okay, and then we're going to start moving the hue slider until we get quite a nice warm brown colour, and somewhere around there looks great, 35, and I'm going to click OK. Now that's given us an overall wash of colour, which there's nothing wrong with that, but I'd like to sort of take it a step further forward. Now if we double click on the edge of the layer here, we're going to bring up the layer style dialog box, and what we're going to do, we're going to take some of this effect away, and I'm going to do that by dragging this this slider, this blend if slider, the top one, which controls the top left hand, controls all the darker tones. I'm going to drag it across, And you'll see now the sky's changing and some of that colour's being drained out the sky. I'm going to hold down the Alt Option key and I'm going to click on the slider to split it, and this will help give us a better transition for the effect. So I'm going to keep dragging it, and you'll now start to see we've got a much smoother graduation of tone. Okay, I'm going to keep bringing, play around with this slider until we get the right effect I want. And somewhere around there looks good, and click OK. And what we've done is basically split the toning. So rather than having an overall wash of that lovely brown colour, we've actually split it, and so it's mainly now affecting those highlights. Now what that's also done, it's drawn the viewer's attention in this image to that area where the tree, behind the tree, because obviously that's where the lighter cloud formations are, and also this dust in the field. So that effect's really helped to accentuate that part of the image. So that's a fairly simple one. I will just discuss as well very quickly, it's worth with these kind of color adjustments sometimes looking at the blending modes. This is in normal at the moment. Some of my favorites are soft light, so I can have a look at that, and that's kind of drains some of the colour out of the effect, so not right for this image. And then we can also try colour, okay? And colour is useful if you do some of these effects and you find you've got some kind of artifacts coming through, or some tonal values have shifted. Try your blend mode of colour, and that sometimes will allow the colour effect to come through, but not those tonal distortions. For now, I'm just going to leave this one in normal mode. So here's before, and here's after. So just to go over that again, we've made the color adjustment to a hue color adjustment, and it could either quite easily go back in and change that. Maybe we want more of a maybe green color. Click OK there, and then what we did then was went into the layer styles, double clicked on the layer like so, and then we adjusted these blend diff sliders to just affect where that colour laid in the image, and then drain the colour from the other areas, the darker tones of the sky. So pretty straightforward, but a nice technique to use on some images. Okay, so this section is about gradient maps. Now, gradient maps are a little bit more tricky in my opinion. I've got a little bit more used to them now, but they can be a little bit, take a bit of time to get your head around. But as all with all things Photoshop, if you're looking for gradient maps, there's a lot of gradient maps already done for you out on the web, often for free, and it's worth looking for them if you fancy having a go. What we're going to do now is go down once again to the adjustment layers, and we're going to click on gradient map. Okay, and this is the default black to white gradient map. Click on that there, and this brings up the gradient editor. Now you'll see a lot of the presets I've already got in here, ranging all sorts of weird whatever colours, and you'll notice that it doesn't always go from one dark tone to a light tone. Sometimes you can have a light tone like this one, a colour, what they call colour stop, right in the middle of the gradient, and it can get quite funky. As you can see in this image, it's gone almost solarized, and I don't often use them for anything sort of like that, but I use them really just to apply a colour to the graded black and white tone, as I'm going to show you. So I'm going to start off with something fairly simple. I'm going to just pick out one of my favourite gradients, which is something normally running from a brown, a warm colour, to a darker colour. Okay. And with these, you can swap these stops over. I often rather have my darker tones down this end and my lighter tone up this end, as you would find in a histogram. The lighter tones are always on the right hand side, the darker tones on the left. So that just helps me out. And so what we're going to do, when we click on one of these stops, we can basically click on the colour down here, and we can just pick a colour out like we did earlier in Lightroom. And often I will pick a dark tone, normally black at this end, and at this end of the highlights I'll pick out a warm but very light tone, somewhere around there. Okay, once we've done that, we've set our dark and light tones and the colour we want to assign to them. We can then come in and just click underneath this bar, and we can add another tone. Don't worry if it's the wrong colour, because all we've got to do is come down here, click colour. I mean, again, we need a darker tone on here, so I'm going to come up a little bit on this color picker, and don't want it black, but we don't want it too light either. But I want to pick up a bit of color, so like a warm brown, somewhere around there looks good. And then we can drag this a bit further up and get that lovely sort of graduation of colour and tone. And in between, you can get these little in between midpoints, and those are like to help the transition come into effect. So like we did with the blend if sliders, it's very similar to that. So I'm going to drag this midtone one up a little bit, and they're going to come up here, and underneath the lighter tones here, I'm going to click on there to add another stop. And here we can pick out a darker tone, but still, you know, fairly lightish. It's like a 3/4 tone, somewhere like there. And we can start to play around with that one as well. So we're assigning a color to a grayscale at the moment to map it to the image. And we may find that this highlight may need to go lighter, maybe even white. So let's bring that up. You'll notice now the clouds are coming a bit more neutral, which is good, because again, we don't want an overall watercolor. So let's leave this one where it is for a moment. I'm going to click OK up here. And you've got a couple of other options here. I always click on dither. Sometimes you might want to try reverse. I don't with this. I just want to leave it as it is. So there's our gradient map applied. And once again, we can drop the opacity down on this a little bit and allow for that original colour to come through, if we wish. And also we can do our usual trick, which is to maybe try soft light, which is quite nice. And you can see that's actually affecting the tone quite nicely on that image. Or if you don't want that, come into colour and you'll just get the colour effect but not the tonal adjustments. Okay, we could also, with this effect, as with all the others, is we could, if we wanted to, fill the effect with black if we want, and we can just paint it in with a paintbrush like so. So maybe we just want to affect the tractor more, make that look a bit more antique-y, if that's the right word, I don't know. But you get the idea. We can do numerous amounts of effects by selectively adjusting the effect rather than doing like a global adjustment. So if you look at the tractor now, it's going very much more a uniform colour, which is what I wouldn't want particularly with this image. But that just gives you an idea of what's possible. I'm just going to come back out of there a minute, take that mask away, and we can come back in and have another play. And maybe you want to apply something a bit more adventurous, so maybe I would, rather having something brown, I'd maybe cool this image down the lower tones and bring these green out in the background there. Something like that works quite nice. So you get the idea. It is a bit tricky, gradient maps. I do use them, but I think there's quicker ways of getting the effects you want. A couple I've already shown you, and the next one, next effect I'm going to show you, I think is much easier to grasp. But nevertheless, there's lots of presets out there for the gradient editor, and it's worth having a play around with it because you can get some very interesting effects. But it just took a little bit of a while to master. Okay, so my final adjustment, and probably my favourite, is using curves. Now, it's very similar aspects to some of the other ones I've shown you in this video, but I think the great thing about the curves is that likelihood is you've used curves before and are familiar with it, and therefore the interface is that a little bit easier to grasp. So let me show you what I mean. This is a very old image of mine, and I just thought it'd be nice to sort of add some selective colour more to the clouds. It's like a sunset here on a stormy day. So what I'm going to do is come down, go to curves, And within the curves dialog box, you have got some presets here, which you may or may not notice before. Some very weird and wonderful ones, some cross-processing, etc. But we can make our own. And what I'm going to do is to go into each individual channels and pick out what I want. So I want to add a little bit more red and probably a bit more warmth to the highlights here. So what I'm going to do is add some control points down here, and I'll keep it on the middle of the graph to keep it neutral. And at the top here, I'm going to add another one, but I'm going to then move that up slightly. You can see on screen it's going a little bit more red. I'm going to overdo it, if anything. I can always come back in. And I'm going to leave the other two the same because I don't want to affect any other part of the image. But we can sort of lessen the steepness of this gradient here, and that will just smooth out the transitions a little bit. So if we go too sharp, it'll suddenly have a bit of a cut off and look completely wrong. So we want to keep it nice and smooth, like so. Then I can go down to the blue and again add some control points. And on this one, I want to make it go a bit more yellow. So I'm going to bring this one down a little bit. Okay, don't think we need to worry about the green. While we're in the blue, actually, I'll just pull this up a little bit, and that will intensify some of the blues in the image that are already evident in this picture. Okay, like so. So we're splitting the tone now. So this end of the graph is adding yellow to the highlights, and this end is adding some blue to more the shadow end. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the red. And I'm just going to bring a bit more red into this area, like so. Click OK. So here's before, and here's after. Just keep an eye on the sky there, and you can see that's at a very subtle but quite significant warming to the sky area, the highlights there. Okay, so before we finish, I just wanted to point out I haven't actually covered a good old colour balance. And of course, you can get, again, it's a little bit more limiting but easier to use. You could probably get something similar we're using colour balance. Like so. I'm just trying to attack the highlights here, but as you can see, it's more of a global adjustment. You can't quite as easily control it. Although saying that, we could come in and maybe try and drop the effect off as we did before by using the blend if sliders. So if there's a wheels away, I'm just giving you some choices here, and my first choice normally is to go to the curves, because I just think that's kind of easier to control than the gradient maps. But I do use, you know, several of these different ways of working depending on the image and maybe my mood, I don't know. But curves for definite gives you the control and the ease of use, in my opinion. So thanks for watching. I hope you've learnt a few things from this video, and I hope to catch you on the next one. Cheers for watching.